Hi everyone and welcome to today's Catherine Pooler 1x1 release. Now I'm going to be playing with their hearts die and creating my very own hearts card base. So I've taken the largest stitched hearts from that collection. It's a stackable stitch die. Now I've got a card that's top folding and I'm going to run this through my big shot with a gap on the top where it's not going to cut. So I will run this in one passing through my big shot, and then what I'm going to do is I'm also going to cut a full version. So I'm going to adhere that on the top, so that then you will see a full heart and it will open at the back. So I'm going to also create a little thin border along with the stitch hearts and play with this polka dot cover plate dies. So this can cut a whole panel, a background panel to fit your card base, but I'm going to cut it with the largest heart again. I'm going to be using this largest heart a lot throughout this whole card process, and so I'm actually going to trim it off again a little bit more. I found it was a little bit too much and too big, and then I also, with the largest and the second largest of the heart, I did one passing to create a stitched border as well. So lots of layers this card, so extra postage if you're going to post this in the mail. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start layering it. I felt like overall this card, look, it's a little bit clean and simple, but because it's got lots of layers and dimension, it worked perfectly. So I'm going to start off with adhering with a liquid adhesive, the full heart on the card base, the heart card base, and then I'm going to layer the polka dot die cut on the bottom part of the heart. Now I went in between each of the dots, and because I didn't want this to lift, I did take my time in making sure this was all adhered down properly. I also adhered down with the liquid adhesive. It's all with liquid adhesive today. I did not want this to budge. I thought it had enough dimension with the different layers of cardstock that I didn't need to add extra foam in between these layers. Now, being careful as I place this down and just pressing lightly. I did not want to ooze it. I would like to think I used enough adhesive that it didn't ooze, but you can never tell until you press down. So I did a gentle touch and then I pressed down a little bit heavier as I went along. And see, this card is beautiful. It's a beautiful heart-shaped card, and I love to think outside the square in other ways in using my full stackable dies. Now, I've got the His and Hers Stampset here from Catherine Pooler, and I'm going to be stamping in It's a Girl and Sandcastle inks. I'm going to be using the stamping the images of the couches or the sofas. We call them couches here in Australia, and they do come with coordinating dies, which is perfect. And because I am going to be honest, my Sandcastle ink is a little bit on the dry side. I need to get a refill. I did have to stamp that more than once. Plus the It's a Girl ink is a little bit I would say very, very light. So I thought I just kept stamping until I got the desired saturation on my stamped image. And I did it overall 3 times. Now for the sentiment, I'm going to make my own cardstock by ink blending very lightly with the Twilight grey tone Catherine Pooler ink. So I've got a strip of white cardstock and I've just got a blender tool that I'm going to just cover very heavily and try and saturate as much as I can without trying to warp my cardstock, because I got a little bit heavy-handed and I was bending that cardstock. So, you know, like I had to go and take this cardstock offline, give it a trim. The sentiment I pulled from the same stamp set, and the trick is that I tried to make it close to the size as possible, and because the edges where you go over give that little bit of shadow, I went over and made sure all the edges were kind of evenly shadowed again. I have added ink to this white cardstock, and because I've done that and I want to heat emboss that sentiment with white embossing powder, I need to make sure I soak up that saturation, any saturation on that cardstock. To do that, I added my anti-static powder tool over the top, and I'm going to powder puff that. I'm going to make sure that that's as dry as possible. Now, Catherine Pooler ink's a little bit more slow drying ink than normal, but it is still a dye ink essentially. So that process of powdering my my little To Be Sentiment cardstock there is prepping it so I can, and the sticky ink is going to stick on the actual cardstock, and that's where the actual powder is going to adhere to only. Now, I can't be overly cautious. I did, pour the powder on top. There were some strays absolutely hanging around. I did ink this panel overall. So I'm going to, once I've stamped that and I've added the powder, I'm definitely grabbed a brush and brushed off any excess. I give it a good old tap because yes, the powder was definitely on there on the sentiment, but it also had a couple of strays. So I'm giving it a good old flick and a tap and then brushing away any excess. Then I'm going to heat set that with my Wow Heat tool. I'm going to make sure that tool is going to be on setting 2. The setting 2 is for actual heat setting, not drying. Now, because I have trimmed this card panel down, I didn't want to burn my hands, so I've used a little tool, squeezy tool, tweezers thing. It's a bit different because when you squeeze it, it opens, and when it's you don't squeeze, it shuts. It works the other way around. Okay, so I waffle and I digress. I'm sorry. All right, so once I've heat set that, the bright white in Wow embossing powder really makes that so opaque and white that it stands out really well against that grey. So this card is very simple. Overall, aesthetically, it's simple because it's a lot of white pieces, but there is a lot of layering elements and textures, I suppose, with the die cutting. And I'm just going to foam mount all 3 pieces, and that will be it for my card creation. Now, off screen, I ended up adding, I found it was a little bit too white. I ended up die cutting with grey cardstock and adhering every single dot down. Yep, I did that. Off screen. I just couldn't figure out, I just wasn't overall happy, but I think that ended up really well with that extra grey dots in there. So I hope you enjoyed today's card creation. I hope you leave a comment. I'd love to read your comments, and I really appreciate you watching and supporting my channel. There is affiliate links below to the Catherine Pooler store. It's just to support my crafting hobby and habit, and I just want to disclose that up front. So thanks for watching, guys. Take care.